The polished oak of the witness stand felt cold and unyielding beneath Hayes's hands, a stark contrast to the simmering heat of humiliation coiling in her gut. She kept her posture straight, a discipline drilled into her soul over years of relentless training, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond the judge's head, a trick to maintain composure under fire. In the gallery, the whispers were like the rustling of dry leaves, brittle and sharp. They were laughing at her. Not loud, boisterous laughter, but the quiet, cutting kind that seeps into your bones. Her family, her father, Robert, her mother, Clara, her siblings, Leo and Amelia, sat at the plaintiff's table, a united front of smug certainty. Their lawyer, a man with a practiced, sympathetic frown, had just finished his portrayal of her. An ungrateful, estranged daughter, a ghost who had reappeared only to claim a piece of a legacy she had long since abandoned. A waste. The word hung in the stale courtroom air, delivered from her own father's lips with a chilling finality. He had said it with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away a fly. She chose her own path, Your Honor, disappeared for years without a word. To us, she was a ghost, a waste of the opportunities we gave her. His voice, once the source of her childhood comfort, was now a weapon turned against her. Clara had nodded in perfect, rehearsed agreement, dabbing at her dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief, a portrait of maternal grief that Hayes knew was as hollow as a drum. Leo and Amelia, her older siblings, had already given their testimony, their words dripping with a venomous mix of pity and scorn, painting a picture of a troubled, lost sister who simply couldn't handle the responsibilities of a normal life and had run away. They spoke of the family estate, her grandfather's legacy, as if it were a sacred trust she had defiled by her very existence, by her audacious claim to a share that was rightfully theirs. The truth was far more complex, a story of ambition misunderstood, of love offered with crushing conditions, and of a departure that was not an escape but a calling. But truth had no place here. This was theater, and she had been cast as the villain. Her own lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man named Davies, had advised silence. "Let them build their own pyre, Hayes," he had whispered to her before she took the stand. "The higher they pile the kindling, the brighter the fire." So she remained silent, her stillness a stark contrast to their theatrical outrage. She saw the jury, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. They saw what they were meant to see, a pale, quiet woman in a simple gray suit, seemingly out of her depth, facing a respectable, grieving family. They couldn't see the steel in her spine, the scars hidden beneath the fabric, or the weight of the responsibilities she carried in a world they could barely imagine. Her father's lawyer approached her now, his voice dripping with condescension. "Miss Hayes, can you tell the court what you have been doing for the last 12 years? What work have you done? What contributions have you made to society that would entitle you to a portion of your grandfather's hard-earned estate?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried through the entire room. "Or is it true, as your brother testified, that you have drifted from one menial job to another, unable to hold down any real responsibility?" The lie was so audacious, so complete, that a bitter smile almost touched her lips. Menial jobs. Drifting. The jury members shifted, their minds clearly made up. Hayes drew a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting of dust and deceit. She met the lawyer's gaze, her own eyes clear and unwavering. "My work is a matter of public record," she stated, her voice even and calm, betraying none of the storm within. "Though it is classified." A ripple of derisive chuckles went through the gallery. Classified. It sounded like a desperate, childish invention. Her father shook his head in performative disappointment. Her brother, Leo, smirked openly. Their lawyer straightened up, sensing a final, killing blow. "Classified? How convenient. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case rests on a simple truth. This woman abandoned her family and her duties. She has offered no evidence of a stable life, no proof of income, no justification for her claim. She is, as her own family attests, a ghost at this feast, asking for a meal she did not help prepare." He returned to his table, a triumphant glint in his eye. The judge, an older man with tired eyes and a reputation for being unshakably pragmatic, sighed. He looked down at Hayes, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes, the court requires evidence, not mystery. Your family has presented a detailed account of your estrangement. You have offered nothing. Do you have anything to substantiate your life for the past decade? Any documentation at all?" This was the moment. The precipice. Davies had told her it might come to this. He had a single file in his briefcase, sealed with official markings that spoke of federal authority. She had authorized him to use it only if absolutely necessary, hoping it wouldn't come to this. She had wanted to win this on principle, not on power, but they had left her no choice. They had tried to erase her, to render her invisible, worthless. Now they would see. "Yes, Your Honor," Hayes said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. "My counsel has my service record. It was submitted to this court under seal." The judge blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his weary features. He hadn't seen it. Sealed documents in a civil inheritance case were unusual, typically reserved for protecting sensitive business information or minors. He gestured to the clerk. "The file, let me see it." The courtroom buzzed with a low, curious energy. Hayes's family exchanged confused, dismissive glances. A service record. What could that possibly contain? A few years in some clerical position, dishonorable discharge. Their minds raced to fabricate the most pathetic scenarios. They had always seen her decision to enlist as a final act of rebellion, a foolish choice made by a girl who didn't know her place. They imagined her failing, washing out, and living a life of quiet shame too great to ever admit to them. The clerk, a thin, nervous man, retrieved a slender manila envelope from a locked box and placed it on the judge's bench. The red wax seal was stark against the plain paper. The judge picked up a letter opener and slid it with a precise, deliberate motion. He slid out a small stack of papers, no more than 10 pages, and began to read. Hayes watched him, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum. This wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. It was about reclaiming the person she had become from the caricature they had created. The first few seconds of the judge reading were met with the same bored silence. Then something shifted. The judge, who had been leaning back in his chair, slowly sat up, his spine straightening until he was perched on the edge of his seat. His eyes, which had been skimming the page, were now fixed, scanning each line with an intensity that silenced the room. The whispers died. The shuffling of feet stopped. All eyes were on the judge's face. He subtly paled. His knuckles, gripping the edge of the document, were white. He read a page, then another, his breathing growing shallow. He looked up from the paper, not at the lawyers, not at the jury, but directly at Hayes. And for the first time that day, his eyes held something other than judicial impartiality. They held a profound, staggering respect. Awe. He swallowed, his throat clicking in the dead silence. He cleared his throat, but the first sound that came out was a choked rasp. He tried again, his voice now a low, formal tone that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. "The court. Court will take a brief recess," he stammered, his usual authority momentarily gone. But he didn't move. He continued to stare at the file, then back at Hayes. He seemed to be wrestling with the very fabric of the reality presented to him. He shook his head slightly as if to clear it and picked up the top page again, reading one line out loud, a whisper that somehow carried the force of a thunderclap. His voice trembled slightly. "Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster." He trailed off, his eyes wide. Her father, Robert, scoffed, a strangled, ugly sound. "What is this nonsense? Some kind of forgery?" The judge's head snapped up, his gaze fixing on Robert with a fury that was anything but judicial. "Silence!" he boomed, the word cracking like a whip. The room flinched. The judge had their complete, undivided attention now. He stood up, an act of deference so unexpected it sent a wave of shock through the gallery. He held the file in his hand visibly shaking, not from age but from the weight of what he held. He looked at Hayes, his voice now filled with a reverence that bordered on disbelief. He ignored her family, the lawyers, everyone. He spoke only to her. "Lieutenant General Hayes," he said, the title landing like a bomb in the silent room. "My deepest apologies. You do not belong in this chair. You do not belong in this proceeding." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every cough, every rustle, every breath. The title, Lieutenant General, echoed off the wood-paneled walls, a 3-star rank so high, so impossibly out of place in this petty squabble over a countryside estate, that the minds of everyone present struggled to comprehend it. Leo's smug smirk dissolved, his face slackening into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Clara, the grieving mother, simply froze, her crocodile tears forgotten, her face a pale, frozen tableau of confusion. But it was Robert, her father, whose reaction was the most profound. The man who had built his life on a foundation of unshakable pride, of being the patriarch, the authority, the center of his family's universe, seemed to shrink in his chair. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. He had called her a waste, a drifter, a failure. And the state, in the form of this stunned and humbled judge, had just called her a general. The chasm between his perception and her reality was too vast to cross. It swallowed him whole. The judge, still standing, composed himself. The brief moment of awe was replaced by a cold, hard anger. He was no longer just a judge in a civil case. He was a citizen, a senior official of the court, confronted with a truth that made the proceedings feel like a grotesque mockery. He looked down at Hayes's family, and the contempt in his eyes was terrifying. "This court has been lied to," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Grossly and maliciously. You have sat here and perjured yourselves, assassinating the character of a woman who, it seems, has dedicated her entire adult life to the service of this country at the very highest levels." He slapped the file down on his bench, the sound making everyone jump. "You painted a picture of a directionless vagrant. The truth is, we are in the presence of a national hero, a 3-star general. I see here commendations from Joint Chiefs, intelligence assignments of the highest security clearance, leadership roles in theaters of conflict most people only read about in hushed tones." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And you called her worthless." He directed this last part at Robert, his voice dripping with disgust. Robert flinched as if struck. Their lawyer, seeing his case and his reputation evaporating before his eyes, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my clients were unaware. There has been a profound lack of communication. They are a simple family, they wouldn't understand." The judge cut him off with a slice of his hand. "Unaware or willfully blind, they testified under oath that she was a drifter with no prospects. That is not a failure of communication. That is perjury. It is a federal offense." He turned his attention back to Hayes, his tone softening completely. "General, I am adjourning this hearing. I am placing this entire inheritance, the estate, and all associated assets under the court's protection pending a full investigation into the financial testimonies given here today. I suspect we will find significant discrepancies." He looked at Hayes's family again, his eyes like chips of ice. "And I will be recommending the district attorney open a criminal investigation into perjury." The word criminal hung in the air, a death knell for the family's future. The fight for the inheritance was over. A fight for their freedom had just begun. Davies, her lawyer, finally allowed a small, satisfied smile to touch his lips. He leaned over to Hayes. "I believe the pyre is lit, General." Hayes gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She felt no triumph, no elation, just a profound, hollow ache. This was not a victory. It was a final, tragic amputation. She rose from the witness stand, her movements fluid and controlled. As she walked toward the aisle, the entire courtroom watched her. The jury, who moments ago had looked at her with pity, now stared with a mixture of shame and awe. The gallery spectators, who had snickered at her, were now frozen, their mouths agape. As she passed her family's table, she did not look at them. She could feel their eyes on her, feel the heat of their shock and shame. But to look at them now would be to acknowledge a connection that no longer existed. They were strangers. Strangers who had tried to destroy her with lies, only to be destroyed by her truth. She walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her, leaving the ruins of her family to smolder in the profound silence she left behind. The first breath of fresh air outside the courthouse felt like a release. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The world kept moving, indifferent to the personal wars waged in quiet courtrooms. She had won. She had gotten justice. But as she stood on the courthouse steps, a decorated general who commanded thousands, she had never felt more alone. The rank, the medals, the commendations, they were a shield, but they could not fill the void left by a family that had chosen greed over love, lies over loyalty. The battle was over, but the war for her own peace was just beginning. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for her family. The local newspaper, which had been covering the inheritance dispute as a piece of small-town gossip, now had a headline that screamed across the front page: "Local family accused of perjury against war hero daughter." The story spread like wildfire. In their tight-knit community, where reputation was everything and military service was held in high regard, the public reversal was brutal. The town that had pitied them now scorned them. Friends stopped calling. Business associates suddenly became unavailable. The social foundation upon which Robert had built his entire life crumbled in a matter of days. He had been a big fish in a small pond, a respected businessman and a figure of local importance. Now he was a pariah, the father who had disowned and defamed a hero. The criminal investigation for perjury moved forward with alarming speed. The district attorney, sensing a high-profile case that would be impossible to lose, pursued it with vigor. The family's financial records were subpoenaed, and as the judge had predicted, discrepancies began to surface immediately. It turned out that Robert had been systematically undervaluing assets and hiding money for years, not just to cheat Hayes, but likely for tax purposes as well. The web of deceit was far more complex than a simple inheritance grab. It was a pattern of lifelong corruption, and Hayes's lawsuit had inadvertently pulled the pin on the whole grenade. Hayes, meanwhile, had retreated. She checked into a quiet hotel in a neighboring city, turning off her phone and disconnecting from the news. She hadn't sought this public humiliation for them. She had only sought the truth. The noise, the scandal, the public's sudden adoration of her, it all felt alien. Her life was one of quiet competence, of missions executed in the shadows, of leadership that was felt, not seen. This sudden, glaring spotlight was deeply uncomfortable. Davies handled all communication, shielding her from the press and the legal storm. He updated her daily. "They're trying to settle," he told her over the phone one evening. "Robert's lawyer called. They're offering you the full share of the inheritance as originally stipulated in your grandfather's will, plus a substantial additional sum for damages, if you'll ask the DA to drop the perjury charges." Hayes was silent for a long moment, staring out her hotel window at the city lights. It was a tempting offer. It would mean an end to the ugliness. She could take the money, which she had earned by right of her grandfather's love, and disappear back into her structured, orderly life. But it wasn't about the money anymore, was it? It was about the principle. They weren't offering this out of remorse. They were offering it out of fear. They wanted to buy their way out of consequences. "No," she said, her voice firm. "The perjury investigation is a matter for the state. It has nothing to do with me. Let the justice system run its course." Davies sighed, but she could hear the respect in his voice. "I thought you might say that. Be prepared, General. They won't take it well." He was right. Her refusal to intervene was seen not as an act of principle, but as a declaration of war. The family, now cornered and desperate, turned even uglier. Leo, always the most volatile, left her a series of rambling, furious voicemails. They started as pleas, then morphed into accusations. "How can you do this to us? To your own family? After everything Dad did for you. He paid for your school, your clothes, he gave you a home, and you repay him by trying to send him to prison. You're a monster, Hayes. A cold, heartless monster." The irony was breathtaking. He spoke of a home she had been driven from, of a father's love that had been contingent on her obedience. He conveniently forgot the years of belittlement, the constant pressure to conform, the utter dismissal of her own dreams. He forgot the day she had tried to explain her desire to serve, to be part of something larger than herself. Her father had looked at her with utter contempt. "The military is for boys who have no other options, and for girls who want to be boys. It is not for a daughter of mine. You will bring shame on this family." He had never understood. To him, power was money, land, and a name respected in the local Rotary Club. The idea of power as service, as sacrifice, as leadership under fire was a language he could not comprehend. One evening, there was a knock on her hotel room door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautious, she looked through the peephole. It was her mother. Clara stood in the hallway, looking small and frail without Robert by her side. This was a surprise. Clara had always been her husband's shadow, echoing his opinions, enforcing his rules. To see her alone, acting of her own volition, was unprecedented. Hayes hesitated for a long moment before unlatching the door. Clara didn't try to come in. She just stood on the threshold, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Her face was etched with lines of stress that hadn't been there a week ago. "Hayes," she began, her voice thin and reedy, "you have to stop this." It wasn't a greeting. It was a demand. Hayes leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. "Blee, stop what, Mother? I'm not doing anything. I'm simply allowing the consequences of your actions to unfold. Your father, he's not well. The stress is, it's too much. Leo is a wreck. The business is falling apart. You've made your point. You've won. Now please call them off." The plea was so deeply rooted in self-interest that Hayes felt a cold wave of disappointment wash over her. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the lies, of the pain they had inflicted. Only a demand that she fix the mess they had made. "They told lies under oath, Mother," Hayes said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "They tried to publicly declare me worthless to steal my inheritance, the part my grandfather explicitly left to me. He believed in me when none of you did. This isn't a game that I can just call off. This is about the law." Clara's face crumpled, but her tears now seemed genuine, born of desperation. "But we're your family. Doesn't that mean anything? Blood is supposed to be thicker than water." Hayes looked at her mother, at this woman who had stood by silently while her husband and son tried to erase her. "I used to think it did," she replied softly. "But I've learned that loyalty, honor, and truth are thicker than blood. The teams I've served with, the soldiers who have had my back in places you can't even imagine, they are my family now. They didn't have to be. They chose to be. You had the choice, too, and you all chose differently." She pushed the door gently, signaling the end of the conversation. "I'm sorry for the pain you're in, but it is pain of your own making. Goodbye, Clara." She closed the door on her mother's shocked face, the soft click of the lock feeling like the final closing of a chapter of her life that had been over for a very long time. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding process of legal maneuvering. The family's lawyers tried every tactic to have the perjury charges dismissed, but the evidence was overwhelming. The court transcript, combined with Hayes's unimpeachable service record, formed an ironclad case. The investigation into Robert's finances uncovered a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts, turning an inheritance dispute into a major case of tax fraud. The empire Robert had spent his life building was revealed to be a house of cards, propped up by deceit. During this time, Hayes found an unexpected source of solace. The judge, the same man who had presided over her humiliation and subsequent vindication, requested a private meeting with her in his chambers. It was an unusual step, but he insisted it was a personal matter. When she arrived, he was not in his robes, but a simple suit. He offered her coffee and sat opposite her, his demeanor respectful and almost paternal. "General Hayes," he began, "I wanted to apologize again formally. What happened in my courtroom was a disgrace. I've been on the bench for 30 years, and I've never witnessed such a calculated and cruel deception. Nor have I ever been so honored to be corrected." Hayes simply nodded, unsure of what to say. "My son," the judge continued, his voice thick with emotion, "was a captain in the 101st Airborne. He was killed in action 6 years ago. He believed in service. He believed in honor. To see a family, your family, so callously dismissed that it struck a nerve." Suddenly, his reaction in the courtroom made perfect sense. It wasn't just about the shock of her rank, it was personal. He understood, in a way few could, the nature of the sacrifice she had made, a sacrifice her family had tried to twist into a flaw. They spoke for over an hour. Not about the case, but about life. About service, loss, and the meaning of family. Hayes found herself opening up in a way she rarely did, speaking of the camaraderie she had found in the military, the sense of purpose that had been absent in her gilded but empty childhood home. The judge listened, a silent, empathetic witness to her life. "They never saw you, did they?" he said at the end of their meeting. "They looked, but they never saw the person you had become." "No, sir," Hayes replied. "They didn't." As she left his chambers, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Her family's validation was a ghost she had been chasing for too long. She didn't need it. The respect of a man like the judge, a man who understood the currency of honor, was worth more than 1,000 empty apologies from her father. The day of the sentencing for the perjury charges arrived. Hayes was not required to be there, and she had no intention of going. Attending would feel like gloating, and there was nothing to gloat about. But Davies called her, his voice urgent. "You might want to come down to the courthouse, General. Not inside. Just be nearby. Robert is going to make a statement to the press on his way in." Curious, Hayes drove to the town square, parking a block away and watching from a distance as the media circus gathered on the courthouse steps. Her family arrived, a grim, beleaguered procession. They looked older, beaten down by the scandal and the legal fees. Robert, his face gaunt and his shoulders slumped, stepped up to the microphones. Hayes expected a defiant, self-pitying tirade. She expected him to blame her, to cast himself as the victim. But what he said surprised her. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual booming arrogance. "I have made terrible mistakes," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd of reporters. "I stand here today a broken man, not because of the court, but because of my own pride and my own blindness. I have a daughter of incredible strength and achievement, a hero, and I failed to see her." He paused, struggling for composure. "I was so trapped in my own expectations of what my family should be that I couldn't see the incredible woman she became. The lies we told, they started small, years ago, lies we told ourselves about her choices, about her life. We told them so often they started to feel like the truth. We were wrong. I was wrong. No punishment the court can give me will be worse than the knowledge that I have lost my daughter forever, and I have no one to blame but myself." It was a confession, a full, public admission of his failure. For a moment, a flicker of the old love, the ghost of the father she had once idolized, stirred in Hayes's chest. But it was followed by a cold, clear wave of reality. This apology was happening here, on the courthouse steps, with cameras rolling. It was a performance, a last-ditch effort to garner sympathy from the public and the judge. It wasn't for her. If it were for her, it would have come in a quiet room with no audience years ago. She watched as they disappeared inside the courthouse, her father's words hanging in the air. It was a good speech. Convincing, even. But for Hayes, it was too little and far, far too late. The sentencing was lenient, all things considered. Robert and Leo avoided prison time for the perjury, but they were given hefty fines and long terms of probation. The tax fraud case, however, was another matter entirely. That would drag on for years, a financial black hole that would consume what was left of the family fortune. The estate, her grandfather's legacy, was finally appraised and settled under the court's supervision. As per the original will, it was to be divided equally among his 3 grandchildren. Leo and Amelia's shares were immediately placed under Leon to help cover their mounting legal debts and fines. Hayes's share, a substantial sum of money and a third of the property, was transferred to her, free and clear. Davies called her with the news. "It's done, General. You've officially received your inheritance." Hayes was on a military base, overseeing a complex logistics exercise. The sounds of helicopters and shouted commands filled the air around her. She looked at the young soldiers moving with purpose and precision, their faces a mixture of focus and fatigue. This was her world. This was her family. The news of the money, the land, felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. "What are you going to do with it?" Davies asked. "The estate, the land, its beautiful country out there." Hayes thought of the sprawling house she had grown up in, the manicured lawns, the silent, tense dinners. It had never felt like home. Not really. Home was a place where you were seen, where you were valued for who you were, not for who people wanted you to be. "Sell my share of the house," she said without hesitation. "Give the proceeds to a veterans' charity. The land, I'll hold onto the land for now. Maybe it can be used for something good one day. A retreat, maybe. For soldiers who need a place to find some quiet." It was a fitting use for her grandfather's legacy. He had been a veteran himself, a quiet, humble man who had seen the best and worst of the world. He would have understood. A few months later, as the dust settled, a package arrived for her at her office. It was from Amelia. There was no letter inside, only a small, velvet-covered photo album. Hayes opened it cautiously. It was filled with pictures from their childhood. Pictures she hadn't seen in years. The 3 of them as toddlers on a swing set. Leo with a missing front tooth, grinning proudly. Amelia in a ballet costume. And Hayes, a small, serious girl with big eyes, usually on the edge of the frame, watching. In every photo, their father was the center of attention, beaming, proud of his perfect family. Their mother was always by his side, smiling her placid smile. On the last page, there was a single photo she didn't recognize. It was of her, around age 17, in the simple uniform of her high school's junior ROTC program. She was standing tall, a flicker of pride and determination on her young face. Scrawled at the bottom in Amelia's handwriting were 2 words: "I'm sorry." Of all the family members, Amelia's betrayal had been the quietest, but perhaps T. He most painful. They had been close once. Hayes stared at the photo, at the girl she used to be, full of a fierce, undefined yearning. Amelia's apology felt different from her father's public performance or Leo's angry voicemails. It felt quiet, and perhaps, for that reason, it felt more real. But an apology couldn't mend a shattered trust. It was a bandage on a wound that had already scarred over. She closed the album and put it away in a drawer. It was a relic from another life, a history she acknowledged but no longer lived in. Her past was a part of her, but it did not define her future. Years passed. Hayes continued her ascent in the military, her reputation for strategic brilliance and quiet, decisive leadership becoming legendary. The name on her uniform was a symbol of integrity and strength. She rarely thought of her biological family. The pain had faded, replaced by a calm, settled acceptance. They existed in the world, she knew, in a much smaller, quieter life than they had planned, but their paths never crossed. She had her own family now, forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. Her soldiers, her colleagues, the network of men and women who dedicated their lives to service, they were her tribe. One day, she was giving the keynote address at a leadership conference in the capital. She spoke about the nature of courage, not just the courage to face physical danger, but the moral courage to stand for the truth, even when it costs you everything. She spoke of integrity as the bedrock of leadership, the alignment of your actions with your values. After her speech, as she was being escorted through the lobby, a young woman approached her, hesitant but determined. She was a junior executive, bright-eyed and sharp. "General Hayes," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Your speech was incredible. It's the reason I found the courage to report a serious ethical breach at my company. You made me realize that staying silent was a betrayal of my own values." Hayes smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "The courageous choice is rarely the easy one," she said, "but it's always the right one. I'm proud of you." As the young woman walked away, her shoulders a little straighter, Hayes felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The inheritance she had fought for, the money and the land, were just assets. Her true legacy was this. It was in the lives she touched, the leaders she mentored, the principles she embodied. Her grandfather had left her an estate. But her life, her service, her unwavering commitment to the truth, that had allowed her to build a legacy of her own, one far greater than any piece of land or any family name. The court case had been a crucible, a trial by fire that had burned away the last vestiges of the quiet, overlooked daughter she used to be. It had forced her to publicly claim her own identity, to stand in her own power. Her family had tried to erase her, to render her worthless in the eyes of the world. But in doing so, they had only succeeded in revealing who she truly was. Not just a soldier, not just an officer, but a leader whose strength was not in her rank, but in her unshakable spirit. Standing there, surrounded by the respect she had earned, she was finally, completely, and unapologetically herself. The silence they had tried to impose on her had become her greatest strength, and her truth, once revealed, had been the sound that brought their world crashing down. And in the quiet that followed, she had finally found her peace.